Good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on where you are. Welcome to our Launching the New Mexico Zoning Atlas webinar. If you've come for zoning, you're in the right place. It's my pleasure to introduce our team. I'm Sarah Bronin. I founded the National Zoning Atlas, and I'm delighted to work with a number of excellent staff members, including two who are on the call today, really actually representing a truly team-wide effort to analyze zoning in New Mexico. The first is Melissa Hayashida. She's actually a senior geospatial analyst, just got that promotion. So we'll add that to her title, even though it's not on the screen, as well as Matthew Harris, who is a zoning code analyst, but also has done a lot of work for us on the research side. So again, the two of them represent really a sort of sprawling effort among our analyst team to catalog zoning conditions in New Mexico. And I'll just say that those zoning conditions continue to evolve. So what we're presenting today is really a point-in-time snapshot based on the information in our database. We'll probably have some spots during the presentation where we allude to zoning code changes that have taken place in New Mexico cities, changes that we are logging as we speak, as well as changes that we think will come in some other jurisdictions. So acknowledging that zoning in New Mexico, as everywhere, is continuous work in progress, we'll start the presentation with that. It's my job to just say at the outset what the table of contents are. So why the National Zoning Atlas is what we'll talk about first. We'll turn to how the National Zoning Atlas is made. We will show you how to use the National Zoning Atlas. This is something that we hope at least some of you have visited the site, and we'll take some of our tips and use it to explore further. Then we'll talk about how New Mexico zones, and then finally we'll pick up with the National Zoning Atlas in action. So that's our sort of overview for today. As we think about why the National Zoning Atlas, if we go to the next slide, we really have three parts to our mission, and we always say it's to digitize, demystify, and democratize information about zoning. And by digitize, we mean to put information, in some cases, that's never been digitized. And Melissa and Matthew will talk about that and some of the issues that we have in finding codes and digitizing them and how we do it. When we say demystify, we really mean to try to help explain zoning to the public, to enable those apples to apples comparisons across places. And later in the presentation, you'll see a comparison of just a few places at the local level, at the metro area level, and although we'll focus on the statewide level, we just want to show you that what we are trying to do is enable you to compare one New Mexico city to another. And to democratize zoning, what we mean by that is really empowering people to use this information to then change zoning. And we all know, if anybody is familiar with zoning, that there's a lot of opportunities for change, and we can explain some of the issues that we're seeing in New Mexico. But the issues in New Mexico, when it comes to zoning, are really not unique. And so across the country, we know that zoning has kind of stagnated as a regulatory tool for a while, and we hope that our information helps empower people to articulate why it needs to change and also how it needs to change in communities across the country, including in New Mexico. So with that, I just wanted to preview a map that you'll see a couple times throughout the course of the presentation, but this is the National Zoning Atlas itself. So we achieve our mission by reading tens of thousands, in fact, hundreds of thousands of pages of zoning codes, and put that information that we extract up on the map. You can see in this map the purples and the grays, and what that tells you is these are places that we have actually analyzed. The purple are those places that have zoning, the gray are those places without zoning. So just at this very high level, look at Arizona versus New Mexico. The prevalence of zoning in Arizona versus the relative lack of zoning across local jurisdictions in New Mexico is something that I think Matthew will be touching on in a few slides. And so with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Matthew, who's going to help us understand how the zoning atlas is made.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, I'm Matthew Harris. I'm a zoning analyst here with the NZA, and I've analyzed zoning across a number of states, including Oklahoma, Vermont, Michigan, Texas, and of course, New Mexico. Now, zoning analysis begins with identifying jurisdictions. And these are cities, towns, counties, villages, and townships with zoning authority. And so this image shows some of the 140 jurisdictions across New Mexico that have the right to exercise zoning. Each zone jurisdiction is made up of zoning districts, and each of these districts have different rules. So we ask a series of questions. And here is a screenshot of 14 zoning districts as they appear in the NZA editor. You can see the district names, and while some allow residential development, some don't. These are all base districts in this jurisdiction, meaning that they're the base classification on the map, on the zoning map. So, but many jurisdictions have overlays, which are separate districts that overlap or overlay one or more base districts to provide some additional regulations. Sometimes these are more strict, sometimes more lenient, but just depending on the objective of that overlay. Now, once we identify that a jurisdiction is zoned, we collect the two main components of a complete zoning code: the zoning text and the zoning map. And both text and map are necessary because while the ordinance text contains a lot of critical information, we also need to know how much land is allocated to each district and how they're distributed across the jurisdiction. So here you can see images of the text and the map that we used for our analysis of Edgewood. NZA team members then complete 2 work streams per jurisdiction: text analysis and geospatial analysis. The text analyst first obtains a zoning text, then specifies a list of districts and systematically logs key data points using NZA's standardized methodology. The geospatial analyst first obtains a zoning map, specifies its zoning districts, and then, depending on the available format, either digitizes a static map like a PDF or standardizes existing geospatial data. And so the work streams here, they really join along the list of zoning districts within a particular jurisdiction. And so now that we have a basic understanding of how the atlas is populated with zoning data, I'd like to hand it over to Melissa to discuss using the NZA.
Thank you, Matthew. Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa, and I'm a geospatial analyst with the NZA. I'm currently analyzing geospatial zoning data in Maine, but I've worked on a variety of states in the past, including Virginia, Georgia, Louisiana, Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. We're now going to walk through how to use the interactive map and get the most out of its features. To follow along with me, you should head to zoningatlas.org/atlas. You can use a computer or mobile phone, but know the size of the map will be different for both. While you get set up, I'll again share the view of the map at the national scale, including Alaska and Hawaii. The colored in areas indicate our total progress. You can see that we have 12 states plus DC completely integrated into the atlas. California and North Carolina are nearing completion, and many major metro areas are completed, including several in Texas, Tennessee, and New York State. And these published areas add up to over 7,800 jurisdictions. About 2/3 of these jurisdictions are confirmed to have zoning, and we have confirmed that the remaining third do not have zoning. Within the zone jurisdictions, we've analyzed and published over 85,000 zoning districts, and our analysts have painstakingly read over 890,000 pages of zoning codes. So these places are home to about half of the nation's residents and cover over half of its total land. Now let's dive into the interactive map. The map opens at the national scale where the legend reflects the zone status of the jurisdictions in purple and gray. The areas shown in white are yet to be analyzed and integrated into the NZA. If you have the tribal land and protected land layers on, you'll see these green and green-brown layers. This is most visible in the western states. In the legend and layer options box in the upper left corner, you have a few options to toggle on and off additional layers and features. You can also change the base map here. Now we'll use the zoom and filter box to explore a chosen geography. We selected New Mexico in the state dropdown, and the map zooms to that state. We have the option to be even more specific with our geography selection. We selected Albuquerque in the metro micropolitan area dropdown. Then we selected Bernalillo County in the county dropdown, and finally the city of Albuquerque in the jurisdiction dropdown. The map zoomed to the city of Albuquerque and outlined the jurisdiction in black. Please note that you can only select one jurisdiction at a time. At this scale, notice that the legend updates to show the zoning district type. Light purple areas indicate primarily residential districts, meaning these districts are primarily zoned for residential uses. Dark purple areas indicate mixed with residential districts, meaning these districts allow a mix of residential and non-residential uses. Tan areas indicate non-residential districts, meaning residential as a primary use is prohibited. These are typically zones allowing industrial uses or other non-residential uses like airports or open space. Now let's apply filters to the map. The Show Me Where People Can Build box has options for quick filtering, like to show where missing middle housing or apartments are allowed. We toggled on the single family homes filter, and you can see the map lost some color. Areas remain colored in where their criteria satisfies the selected filters. In other words, this means you can build a single family home anywhere the map is light or dark purple. In the lower right corner, the filtering results box calculates the zoned acres and numbers of districts that satisfy the filtering criteria. According to these results, 49% of zone acres in Albuquerque or 21% of zoning districts allow single-family housing by right. Note that the filtering results only show calculations for the single selected jurisdiction. Now let's look at the advanced filters box. You should use it for selecting more specific filtering criteria, like whether 1, 2, 3, or 4+ unit housing is also subject to a public hearing, minimum parking requirements, or height caps, among other options. We've selected criteria where 4+ family housing is allowed as of right and has a minimum parking requirement. According to the filtering results, 20% of zone acres in Albuquerque satisfy this criteria. And now I will pass it back to Matthew.
All right, thank you. So we've learned a little bit about the map, and now let's see how New Mexico zones. I'll start with some statewide numbers just to give you a sense of how all of these different zoning codes come together across New Mexico. In all jurisdictions with zoning, we analyzed over 8,000 pages of zoning code, and we logged up to 200 data points for each of the 1,205 districts that make up the zoned land of New Mexico. Yet, as this screenshot from the atlas shows, most of New Mexico's land is actually unzoned. Out of 140 jurisdictions, 63 of them, the ones shown in purple, have zoning, and 77, shown in gray, do not. So now to break down the share of land categories across New Mexico, 10% of the state is designated as tribal land, 34% as protected land, and another 43% is unzoned. This is all that gray area on the previous map. So this leaves only 13% of New Mexico's land subject to zoning. However, zoning is still highly consequential in the state because 85% of its population lives in these 63 jurisdictions with zoning. Now, of this zoned land, 89% allows for residential development. This is a fairly high figure. For context, only 65% of zoned land in neighboring Nevada allows for residential development. And if you remember, residential development occurs in these districts that we identify as either primarily residential or mixed with residential. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah to walk us through some of the statewide findings on residential development.
Thanks, Matthew. So one thing to know is that in addition to the map that Melissa showed and the toggles that you can use, we produce these snapshots, and she's going to show us those in a bigger context. But these stats that you see here come from our snapshot feature, which summarizes data that we've queried. And in our case, we've decided that people would most want to know how single, 2, 3, and 4 family housing is allowed, prohibited, or allowed subject to a special permit or public hearing across jurisdictions. And here's the summary for New Mexico, showing the blue is the most permissive, most allowed as of right. And what we see here is on residential land, which Matthew defined for you. It's both land that's only or exclusively residential or mostly residential, and then mixed use land. That 93% of that land allows for single family housing. Interestingly, in New Mexico, you see 19%, 30%, and 34% of land devoted to residential purposes that allows for 2, 3, and 4 family housing, respectively, to be permitted as of right. This is actually a pretty high number when it comes to statewide statistics, certainly higher than New England states. We've done all of those except for Maine, higher than most of the other East Coast states as well, but even high relative to other Western states. You do see in this slide that light blue, and what that tells you is that the particular type of land, so whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 family, that particular type of housing is allowed subject to a public hearing. Now, you might say, oh, well, it's 22%, 18% of additional land that allows for 2, 3, and 4 family housing as of right in those right 3 columns. But remember that what that means is that a developer has to come in with a project, go through a public hearing process. There's a lot of uncertainty associated with that. And what we've been seeing across the country is that land that has a public hearing requirement doesn't necessarily see a lot of the housing produced that it does allow by public hearing. So for example, land allowing for 4 or more family housing after a public hearing, you don't necessarily see a lot of apartments on that land. So just flagging that that's how you would read this chart, and a note of caution when it comes to that light blue figure. In the next slide, we see this minimum lot size pie chart, or donut as we sometimes call it. This chart has been updated recently, and if you don't follow us on LinkedIn, we had a big explanation about how we are now portraying minimum lot sizes. We are now portraying them using square feet instead of acres. So if you saw the old snapshots, you might have seen this donut in acres. And what we've also done is we've added a category that's shown here in stripes that tells you when minimum lot sizes vary. So how you read this chart is these are the statistics for across the state for single family zoned land. So that amount of land, almost all of the residential land in New Mexico allowing for single family zoning. So all of that land treats single family zoning usually with a minimum lot size mandate, meaning that before you build that single family house, you have to have a certain amount of land. The darkest green in this image tells you how much residential land, what percentage of residential land requires an 80,000 square foot minimum. And you see almost 2/3 of single family land requires 80,000 square feet or more. That next darkest color green, that additional 6% bumps that number up to just past 2/3. 68% of land in the state requires at least 40,000 square feet, or at least 1 acre for folks who think in acres. These are very high numbers. So 2 acres is more than the size of a conventional football field. But one thing that's interesting about New Mexico that we don't see necessarily in other states is the amount of land where the minimum lot size varies. That's the stripe number, that 15%. What that means is it might say, well, for single family housing in a certain kind of configuration or with a certain kind of occupancy, like affordable housing or elderly housing, there might be one minimum lot mandate. And for a different kind of single family housing, there's another kind of minimum lot mandate. So the fact that there's so much land that has that varied requirement suggests that in those places, the regulatory structure may be more complex. It's not as simple as just the one number that you see in the 85% of land with just one number or no minimum lot mandate at all. So something to keep an eye on in New Mexico when it comes to minimum lot sizes. In the next slide, we have a couple of images from the Albuquerque metro area and the Santa Fe metro areas. Because one thing that we've gotten in other presentations when we've shown minimum lot sizes is, oh, well, New Mexico, a lot of the land is rural, so this must be something that can be attributed to the fact that by land mass, of course, lots of land is going to have a large lot acreage because it's in the middle of nowhere, it's far away from population centers, and that makes sense given the type of development. But what these charts show is that even in some of the most populated areas in the state, you still see large minimum lot size mandates. So in the Albuquerque metro area, you see 65% of land, of residentially zoned land for single family housing has an 80,000 square foot minimum. And in Santa Fe, that number is 88% for that, again, roughly 2-acre minimum. So we've started to look at the metro area level when we're doing presentations like this, again, to illuminate the fact that minimum lot sizes are a statewide issue, but they're also an issue even in populated areas where you might not expect to have such large minimum lot mandates. So with that, we'll turn to a different topic, which is accessory dwelling units. And these are the smaller units of housing that are built adjacent to or with single family housing, sometimes as well above shops or commercial developments. And what we found in New Mexico for accessory dwelling units, which is on the next slide, was a sort of a mixed bag approach where if reading this chart, that bright red, that 31% shows where these units on single family land, the percentage of land where they're allowed by right, meaning they're not overly restricted by, for example, occupancy requirements. Only a family member can live there, or only an employee of the principal unit can live there, or only a person over a certain age can live there. We don't see that in 31% of land, single family land across New Mexico. In 36% of land, we do see some of those occupancy restrictions and or public hearing requirements. So there's a sliver there. And so the additional restriction that we have in this pie chart are public hearing requirements, which means that a single family owner would have to go to a commission, schedule a public hearing, speak about why they want the accessory dwelling unit, and may or may not actually be permitted to have it. In 31% of land, however, accessory dwelling units are prohibited. And we could only find this number, by the way, by reading those thousands of pages of zoning codes, piecing it together, and then finally illuminating it in the statewide map. So this is a figure that we haven't, that maybe the public had never known before. A pretty significant amount of land in New Mexico doesn't allow these units. It might be a policy area that statewide policymakers want to look at. We know the ADU legislation has been popular in other states. So with that, next slide. And it's taking a little bit on my end to load, so maybe I'm frozen here, so give it a second. I do want to point folks to, while we're waiting for that to be updated, to a recent report that the Mercatus Center did on accessory dwelling units across the country and state legislation. So if there are any folks out there in New Mexico, check out the Mercatus Center summary of strong ADU laws and weak ADU laws. And it looks like our parking mandate slide is up, so thank you for that. Another thing that we log in our backend database is the extent to which local governments require that people build parking with residential construction. So we found that across the state of New Mexico, 89% of residential land has a parking requirement. And looking at these two images side by side, you can see actually a filter. And here we are back in the Albuquerque region. You can see the filter in our Show Me Where People Can Build list. At the very end, it says housing without parking. And just like before, the filters work. On the left, we've asked, the map is at its base level, so nothing has been selected. On the right, we ask whether you can build housing without parking mandates in the Albuquerque region. And you see it's actually just a very small amount of land in the region that would allow somebody to build a single family home, 2, 3, 4 family, depending on what's allowed in those particular areas, to build that type of housing without a parking mandate. That's another thing that we've seen state governments look at, and might be something worth considering, especially when you see these onerous requirements in large metro areas like Albuquerque. And with that, I'll just turn to the very last slide before turning it back over to Melissa, just to show you that you can compare, using our data, different communities with each other. So I've shown you the Albuquerque on the top left. Albuquerque's metro area on the top right illustrates that while Albuquerque might be permissive when it comes to 2, 3, and 4 unit housing, the Albuquerque greater region is not so much, because you can see on the 3 and 4 family columns on the very top right, the 2 right-hand side columns under Albuquerque MSA, there's that dark blue disappears, meaning that 3 and 4 family housing is not allowed by right. It gets a little worse in Los Lunas, which we also know has just undergone a zoning code update. So hopefully those stats will change in one of our next figures. And we also know, by the way, that Albuquerque has undergone some zoning updates, and we're in the process of inputting those. But the data as it stands shows that Los Lunas has a ways to go in terms of permitting a diverse array of housing options. Rio Rancho, again, just showing the different communities that are in near Albuquerque, smaller communities, and there too, you don't see as much land devoted to 2, 3, and 4 family housing. So Melissa will tell you how you can actually get to this information yourself.
Thanks, Sarah. I want to show you another tool that the NZA has called zoning snapshots. A zoning snapshot is a visual statistical summary of any jurisdiction, county, or metro micropolitan area published to the NZA, and we'll now show you how they look. Here you can see snapshots for the city of Albuquerque, Bernalillo County, and Albuquerque metro area. With zoning snapshots, you can easily review key zoning stats for jurisdictions. For example, at a glance, you can see that the city of Albuquerque shows more permissive treatment of multifamily housing than the county as a whole. And you can generate your own zoning snapshots by going to zoningatlas.org/snapshots. Or if you're exploring the atlas itself and have a jurisdiction selected, you can just scroll down in the map to find some buttons that will take you to the snapshots. Back to you, Sarah.
Great, thank you. And I'll just close by saying, first, appreciate all the work that our team has done on New Mexico. It's continues to surprise us with the amount of regulatory activity, but this has given you at least a glimpse into what we've got on the books, and hopefully, again, we'll see some of those stats change. Just to say, on the next slide, we have a number of resources for communities that are undergoing rezoning, state legislatures we've worked with, including advising on Texas state legislation, helping to inform statewide zoning conversations through things like this report for Colorado, conducting research with external organizations about zoning and its correlations with demographic and social outcomes. In the image on the right, you see a project that we did with the Regional Plan Association on sea level rise. Probably not as big of an issue in New Mexico, but environmental challenges of different sorts face the American West. And we do hope that our data ends up being used in New Mexico for a variety of secondary purposes. So feel free to explore our website. And on the next slide, all of these subject matter areas are areas that we hope the NZA can continue to inform. So whether it's housing, climate change issues, transportation patterns, the social and environmental impacts of development, economic growth, top of mind, I know, for many, and our food supply. So inviting you to use the National Zoning Atlas, share what you find. On the next slide, we have our contact information, and we're on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, YouTube, Instagram. We use these in different ways, but you can always find the latest on our website, zoningatlas.org. And with that, I know that there's a Q&A feature. We're happy to take questions. So feel free to log them in the Q&A feature. I should have said that at the beginning because we always want questions to be queued up. But as you all are thinking of your questions, I would love to start actually by asking Melissa if you could tell us a little bit more about the process for mapping GIS. I do know that in New Mexico, well, you've worked in so many different places. What are the kinds of challenges that you see? And I mean, I will just say New Mexico has a number of small jurisdictions, and some of the challenges that we see across the country, or that you saw in New Mexico in getting information that's up to date, trying to extract information from zoning maps. As a GIS analyst that's seen it all, would love to have you share your comments with our audience today.
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that there was actually really great GIS data and web maps out there for a lot of the larger jurisdictions. For example, it's always nice to see a well laid out web map with great explanation for the public on county websites like Bernalillo County or Santa Fe County, or the city of Albuquerque has a great interactive IDEO web map. But with the smaller jurisdictions, a lot of times there's no GIS data, there's sometimes no map, PDF, or JPEG available online. So we have to reach out to the jurisdiction and hope that they get back to us. Sometimes a map is available just on the wall of a government office. So we ask them to scan it, or sometimes just take a photo if that's easier. And we usually have luck getting the maps back. I think a big challenge is map quality. A lot of times the maps will be a little too blurry to read, or the legends will use, say, two or the same color for two separate zoning districts. There was one map where both R1 and R2 were colored exactly the same. So in situations like that, we have to reach out to the jurisdiction for additional clarity. Some other challenges include just outdated maps where there's areas that have been, say, annexed, and those aren't shown on the map because the map is from 20 years ago. So we're constantly dealing with these sorts of challenges and having to go back and forth between planners to figure out what actually is going on. But when we have a paper map, we will try to digitize it the best we can, a lot of times using current parcel data as a reference. That way we can get it into GIS format and get it into the atlas.
Thank you. And Matthew, I have a question for you too, which is, as I mentioned, and as you know, because on the back end, we communicate internally about updates that need to be made. A number of New Mexico cities have recently undertaken, or in the case of Santa Fe, where I just was a few weeks ago, talking about zoning, is about to launch and is undergoing both a comprehensive plan and zoning update. I'd love for you to talk about how you go about updating data for jurisdictions in the zoning map, retiring zoning districts, logging new changes, both when you have a small scale change and when you have a comprehensive rezoning. I think people would like to understand that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So once we have access to the new information, we gather the new text and the new map, it's a lot about first thing, looking and seeing if the maps where those changes have been made to the district that's zoned, and then also just slowly, methodically, systematically going through the code. We don't want to retire districts that are still there, so we kind of make a list of the districts to then kind of either retire if they're no longer, if that district is expired and it's no longer on the new map and in the new code, or we just change it if we see changes to the provisions. And so a lot of the common provisions we've been seeing, allowing ADUs now, or like removing certain restrictions from ADUs, like the occupancy restrictions that you mentioned, or lowering parking mandates or removing parking mandates. Sometimes like a building height cap is raised, so you can add another story or another 10 feet or whatever it is. So we then kind of track those changes, and so that we can now compare them across time. So it's no longer just a snapshot. We now have a time series. Yes.
Great, thank you. And there's a GIS component to that as well, oftentimes. And Melissa, I don't know if you wanted to just add on anything, and we have another question from an attendee, but anything to the updating process on the GIS side.
This is not necessarily GIS specific, but it's nice that when we make updates, we still retain the old data in our backend database. Currently on the public facing atlas, there's not a way to kind of scroll back in time, but Sarah, maybe you could speak more to this, but I think that is something that we are thinking about, so that someone could see the changes over time.
That is definitely on our wish list, because for us anyway, one of the most interesting things is what types of provisions people are changing and when they are doing changes at the local level. And we see not only that, but of course, statewide reforms. And that's something that we're also trying to figure out how we display that on the map, because sometimes there are differences between local governments' rules on the books and statewide reforms. And right now we are depicting only what the local laws say, but as states legislatures continue to be more active in the zoning space, is something that we have to figure out how to display on the map. So that's actually a good segue into the next question, which is, given our experience in other states, what sorts of zoning reforms do you recommend in New Mexico? Or given the data that we present, I'll just rephrase it a little bit, given the data that you've presented today, what might be the opportunities for zoning reform on a statewide basis in New Mexico? Again, knowing that some communities are taking the lead on their own. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, right off the bat, when we look at those housing allowance charts, it feels very obvious that we want to encourage more, allowing more multifamily housing, right? 2, 3, 4 more family housing. I think that's we see that kind of compacted a little bit in like Albuquerque and some of the major cities, but as those charts show, it kind of diffuses a little bit once we go out beyond that. We want to encourage that everywhere.
Melissa, any thoughts on that?
This is something that I've already seen happening, but more allowing more ADUs. I know Albuquerque in 2023 made ADUs permissible in, I believe it's R1 districts. So, that increases housing uh, substantially. And I believe Bernalillo County also made a similar change, but that's always, one of the first things that comes to mind when I see kind of the type of chart that we are looking at as far as ADUs go.
Yeah, and I think state legislatures consider accessory dwelling unit legislation as low-hanging fruit. And so in that Mercatus report that I just mentioned, we definitely see some of that progress being continually advanced in state legislatures across the country. California has done a number of state legislative changes in that regard and is probably recognized as the gold standard for permitting in a clear way ADUs. So I'll point folks back to that report as well. But again, parking mandates, loosening restrictions on multifamily housing, not only where it's located, but whether a public hearing is required. These are all things that states are considering, and New Mexico might as well. We do have another question about that report in Colorado. And maybe, Matt, you worked on the report in Colorado. It would be interesting for folks to get a brief cliff notes as to what kinds of things were included in that report, the zoning snapshots and so on. But also, do we plan to do one for New Mexico? So I'll maybe answer the second part, but if you could say what's in the zoning report, that might be something that might entice folks in New Mexico to have a zoning report of their own.
Yeah, so it's really an expanded version of what we did today. I mean, we look at all of the provisions that we log, and there's a lot of similarities too. I mean, there's very large minimum lot sizes across the state in Colorado as well. I don't remember all of the figures off the top of my head, but I think there, a lot of these challenges aren't unique to any particular state. So, but we go into a much more detailed description of these statewide trends, and then also we break it down in terms of types of communities. So like urban, like scales of urban development. So from like city centers, principal cities, and then like suburbs, small towns, and kind of see how these distributions of things like minimum lot size, about housing allowance, they work, like how they distribute along those lines. And then also like, yeah, comparisons of metro areas. So we looked at Denver and like all of the, or not all of, but a handful of the suburbs within that metro area, so that we could see a very similar kind of analysis that kind of came out of Albuquerque and its metro area, looking at a few of its suburbs. And it's a much more expanded, thorough exploration of those features.
And we did wrap up with some recommendations for the state of Colorado, which has made progress in zoning reform. And although we do not have, to answer that part of the question, plans to have a New Mexico statewide report, it's something that we're certainly interested and willing to do. We just need a little bit of funding to do that for our staff time. So you might see one. Maybe that's something that we should try to really drum up some support for, but probably only after we've put some of the big city updates into our map and refresh the data yet one more time, although the process is constantly evolving. So I'm really excited that we've finally been able to do this webinar to launch the New Mexico Zoning Atlas, to communicate some of the key statistics about the state, and to hope that it does lead to more change. Yes, more work for us, but that's what we're here for. We're really happy to do it, and looking forward to seeing New Mexico continue to evolve in zoning treatment. I'm going to close the webinar now. We're right at time, and thanks also to Diana Drogaris, who's behind the scenes, our engagement director, making all of this happen, and again to the full team that contributed to the state's work. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.